Welcome to the Filmlings podcast,
an honorably bloody podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 139. The dove says, woo!
It really does.
Every time his name comes up on screen, I go, woo!
He has such a distinctive style, and digging into his past explains so much of that style. But yes, today we are talking about the one and only John Woo, the very, very, very stylish director from Hong Kong who's done a lot of work in America and has definitely developed a very distinctive, unique style that is a merger of a lot of different things and has influenced a lot of things. So it should be fun to talk about him. But before we talk about the films, let's talk about the man behind the films. John Woo was born in 1946 in the Guangzhou city of the Guangdong province as Wu Yu Sing. And his family were Christians at the time. And unfortunately, at that point in time, the Chinese Civil War was going on. And the winner of that war, Mao Zedong, was not down with the whole religion thing. So they booked it out of mainland China into Hong Kong when he was 5, where they lived in a slum. And that slum then burned down when he was 7, and they spent a short time homeless before being relocated into a housing project. Also, you should note that during this time, due to some kind of genetic thing he had going on as a kid, he wasn't able to walk between 3 and 8 due to a spine deformity, but that was later corrected, and he was able to walk for the rest of his life. But he had a very hard childhood, if that was not apparent from all the stuff I just said. That was bad. But he survived it all, and originally he wanted to be a Christian minister, but he found comfort from his life in foreign films, lots and lots of films, including those, especially those of Jean-Pierre Melville from France, and American Westerns, and the music of Bob Dylan. He was coming of age during the 60s. The final scene of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid from the 60s New Age Hollywood, 1969, had a strong influence on his later heroic Bloodshed works, and that should almost directly in some cases.
Yeah, John Woo wears his influences on his sleeve, as we're going to get into.
He's a film fanboy, for sure, and it shows in his work. He started out as a scriptie or a script supervisor at Cathay Studios, and then became an assistant at Shaw Studios. And if that is sounding a little familiar, that should, because of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, both of whom we've talked about on the show. His directorial debut, The Young Dragon from 1974, in fact, had fight choreography from Jackie Chan. He did a lot of work for Golden Harvest Studios, as well, a lot of kung fu procedurals, essentially. But that led to a certain burnout in the early 1980s, where he felt like he was just doing assembly line, run-of-the-mill, off-the-production cuff type work. He decided to take some time off and work on a passion project that he had going on for quite some time, and in fact got a friend of his, another director, to help finance, called A Better Tomorrow from 1986. And that focused on close quarters, two-handed gun fu fights, which are like exactly what I just said. They're close quarters, they're two hands. It's almost like using guns as a kung fu weapon. It's very, very cool and very, very signature. A high emotional melodramatic drama and an inversion of the good guy, bad guy dynamic, which became so popular in the later 20th century in Western media. He continued to make many heroic bloodshed films throughout the 80s and 90s. The Killer and Hard Boiled led to international acclaim and were the best performing Hong Kong films in America since Bruce Lee. He came to the U.S. in 1993 to direct Jean-Claude Van Damme in Hard Target, and began his U.S. career that way. He struggled adjusting to the studio control in America, finding both Hard Target and Broken Arrow from 1996 to be kind of watered-down versions of his own style. But then came Face Off, which he rejected multiple times, I believe at least 3, before finally accepting after the writer and the studio agreed to put it more within his realm of expertise, like instead of making a sci-fi movie, making it a modern day action kind of spy thriller.
It's still a sci-fi movie.
It's still a sci-fi movie, right? But it's not fully Fifth Element.
It's not
or
set
anything
in the
like that.
future. It's like a near distant, like,
Yeah.
maybe some secret lab has this technology.
Yeah, secret government technology, stuff like that. But that one took off. It was a huge success and
Took
even
off its
garnered.
face?
Yes, literally. But it was very, very popular. It was a box office success. It was popular with fans and even garnered an Oscar nomination. He completed a few other American projects that performed well at the box office as well, like Mission Impossible 2 and Wind Talkers, but eventually returned to Chinese cinema with two massive, which feels like an understatement, two-part projects, Red Cliff and The Crossing, one of which we'll be talking about today, and then is returning to American cinema again in the near future with his new project. It was announced in 2021 called Silent Night, which is a revenge picture about a father avenging his child with underground arms dealers or human traffickers. I can't remember exactly. But the like
Added to the list
gimmick.
of Taken adaptations.
Basically. But this one, Jonathan, is totally silent.
Oh, I see what he's doing there with the
There
title.
there will be no dialogue, just sound design.
Interesting.
It feels like the kind of movie that's going to take place in the course of entirely one night.
Yeah, I can see that. Like a 24 kind of thing.
Yeah. And we almost like John Wick style, we just see this guy taking down a bunch of people in the middle of the night, and slowly the story is revealed, probably through flashbacks. I'm willing to bet some very dramatic close-ups too.
Lots of cross dissolves.
It's going to be interesting to see how the story is presented without any sound at all, but it should be interesting. But anyway, Jonathan, what movies are we talking about specifically today from the one and only John Woo?
Yeah, we're talking about 4 films, which we have already mentioned in the intro. The first being The Killer from 1989, starring Chow Yun-fat, Danny Lee, and Sally Ye. We'll be following that up with Hard Boiled from 1992, starring Chow Yun-fat and Tony Leung. And then we'll be talking about Face Off from 1997, starring John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. And finally, we will be talking about Red Cliff from 2008. We're going to talk about the whole thing. If you watch it, it will most likely be the international version, which is both parts put together. So just know that it is a 2-part film that has been edited down. Anyway, that film also stars Tony Leung and Zhen Fengye. Apologies for butchered pronunciations, as always.
Yeah, we're not good with tonal.
Nope.
All right, so first up is The Killer from 1989. Jason, take it away.
The Killer from 1989. Mob assassin Jeffrey is the best in the business, an artist with a gun. During his last hit, he blinds a beautiful lounge singer in the crossfire. Nursing her back to health, the two fall in something like love, and Jeffrey retires. But the mob is soon after him with a dirty double cross. Once loose cannon Inspector Ling gets involved, the bullets and birds are bound to fly.
All right, Jonathan, so The Killer. I love this movie. It's very melodramatic, but I love this movie. And something we should keep in mind, especially when we talk about The Killer and Hard Boiled, the first 2 films on our docket today, is that they're both basically passion projects, and they very much have that feel. They have the feel of like a bunch of young guys like getting together and just making a movie for the fun of it because they love it. And
I actually want to
really
bring that up in overall because I feel like John Woo has inspired many young bucks like us who are just going out and just like, let's just make a movie where we shoot each other. That's all it needs.
Young YouTube vibes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like it really does. Like
I'm
it
literally
feels like
thinking, like I was gonna bring up later, but like it's Rocket Jump. Like John Woo basically spawned Rocket Jump as far as I'm concerned.
It really, really is. And to that extent, like these are all made in Hong Kong, but outside of the Hong Kong studio system. And I can only imagine how frustrating that must have been for these studios who only wanted John Woo to make kung fu off the line pictures. And instead
that's
he's
like the China
nah.
version of many directors we've talked about, where like all the French people were making was these hoity-toity like class historical dramas, period dramas, and so they just went out and created surrealism or the 400 Blows or whatever.
Yeah, rebelling. A system that is frustrating enough will create artists who just have to rebel against it. Artists are almost by default rebels, or at least
They have something else that they have to get out.
Yeah, they have to do their own thing. They can't stick in the system. But I do love that about these movies. And in fact, one of the coolest things about them is that both of them are financed by the leads. The actors, Chun Yun-fat and Danny Lee in this case, and then Tony Leung in Hard Boiled, their own finance companies backed these movies. Because as we talked about in the intro, A Better Tomorrow was backed by one of Woo's older director friends, but that he only had so much money. So that backing did not last much beyond like one movie, or A Better Tomorrow Part 2, I should say. But then essentially the actors involved with that liked it so much, liked how cool it was and how much fun they had, that they were willing to go back and pay basically to be part of this movie. And of course, they're investors in this, right? And these were all very successful movies that eventually got Woo kind of recruited to Hollywood. But the fact that they're willing to put up their own money, that's not something you see a whole lot in the industry at any point in time. In fact, you normally only see it with like egomaniacs or real wild children. So that should tell you a lot about that should tell you a lot about like the people who kind of made this movie and just like the fun vibe of this movie, which is very melodramatic. But not so saccharine that like there isn't blood and action and grit in it as well. It's an interesting mix of the two. Yeah. And it's all kind of packed together with this very obvious but slick style, I'll say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, it's like he knows all the right techniques and he uses them, but he uses them in like a way that's just big enough to be noticed. Like he doesn't want he doesn't want anyone to like miss all the things that he's doing.
Yes.
But they're all really fun and they all like, it's consistent throughout. So it like creates its own tapestry of like the way that he uses the pathos, because he loves to just like dump pathos on scenes when it needs it, or he wants you to see this really cool thing that we're doing, so he's going to make sure that you see the really cool action at the same time, and then just like finding the right moments to switch between the sappy parts and the super cool action parts, that just makes it like a really fun ride.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's decidedly fun. I'll also say, Jonathan, I'm not sure what your experience with this film was. There were definitely moments, and I actually had this problem with all of the movies today, except I guess Face Off, because Face Off's in English, where I found myself not reading the subtitles occasionally, because I just kind of understood what was going on. Not that I magically learned how to speak Cantonese, but more of like, and we talked about this before with some movies where they kind of start to approach that silent film quality, where you don't necessarily need subtitles or intertitles to understand what's going on. And I think that's a side effect of the scaling of John Woo's techniques, because he does everything so big, everything's so telegraphed, that like I did not feel like there were definitely moments where, especially I always think about the scene in the apartment where he's with his girlfriend who's blinded, sort of, I don't know if she even knows it at that point. I think she knew it in the end. And the other guy, the cop has shown up, and they're like pretending to be friends for her sake.
Yeah.
Like that one, that scene is brilliant and tense, and uses like the two guys pointing a gun, but the blind girl can't see it thing to just really work in some dramatic irony. That's just great. But like just some of the details of like the insults they were throwing back and forth, like shrimp head I caught, but for the most part, like I didn't even need that. I knew exactly what was going on like the whole time. I understood the motivations and the tensions. And at that point, like the dialogue just sort of became extra. Like it's nice, but like when you telegraph the whole scene that well, when you use the cinematic language so well, I kind of don't need the dialogue. Now, when I zoned out on reading subtitles in like later movies like Red Cliff, I was punished because there's so many people. But even in that movie, there's some pretty. I was reading the
subtitles and I still got confused.
Yeah. I was maybe relying a bit too much on that one Chinese history podcast I listened to that one time for a lot of that movie, which did not include the soccer game. But that's for a later discussion. But yeah, for this movie, the language is so, I don't know, it's like all caps, but it doesn't feel like it's yelling. Does that make sense?
So this is what I was going to say, because I don't want to use the same analogy. Like when we talked about Bollywood, we talked about Bollywood as being like filmmaking in all caps or in bold.
That is very much.
I would say this is filmmaking in large print. It's not yelling at you, but it wants you to make sure that you're not missing anything. And so like, it's not like, I want to say that the story is built on, I don't want to say caricatures because that feels a little bit like negative, but almost like archetypes. So you've got, and this happens throughout the film. Like he's doing all these things really intentionally, obviously, but like the detective and the assassin are like alternately in white or in black, depending on, and ultimately they have like a meeting of the minds, a meeting of the understanding. And so like their colors switch throughout the film, but he's like building all these things in like, you know, that's like a Hitchcockian thing. That's a very traditional type of way of building in these themes. But a lot of that stuff is built in through the visuals. And again, like you're saying, like through the interactions and the ways that it's going on, you could almost turn off the sound and still get the flow of the story and the characters and their relationships to each other.
Oh yeah. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Perfect. And we should also mention that John Woo, a little bit of a film brat, but of course, kind of like the film brat, if that makes sense, because of when and where he grew up. He was kind of growing up with that new generation of new wave movies from France and from America already in circulation. It's kind of what he grew up on in a lot of ways. And this movie very specifically, as stated by John Woo after the fact, was influenced very heavily by Les Samurai, which is from Jean-Pierre Melville, and from Mean Streets, which is from Scorsese. We've actually covered that on the show.
Ironically, though, Les Samurai is like filmmaking in all lowercase.
Les Samurai is filmmaking in lowercase, but it has so many. If you've ever wondered why John Woo always has doves, and I know everyone points this out and everyone fixates on it, it's because of Les Samurai. It's because of the bird in that movie. And it's Les Samurai is stated as being one of his favorite movies of all time, and that just makes it explains so much. Both like the bad guy, good guy, of like an assassin, because I think the guy in Les Samurai might actually be an assassin too, or definitely some kind of.
Yeah, he was. He was an assassin.
I mostly remember
just
the
also
bird
like
and the
a
hat.
sad sack. Yeah.
Yes, that too. He was a sad assassin. But there was.
I think Mean Streets didn't have a shootout in a church, but it did have like this kind of semi-religious overtone to it.
It did. It really, really did. And that makes sense when you consider John Woo's like Christian upbringing.
He definitely builds the ideals in there.
Yeah, and the fact that he wanted to be a minister at some point, which normally cues us in that he's not just like passively Christian. He's into it,
Yeah.
which very much communicates and would explain why he empathizes so much and feels so connected to like Italian American filmmaking as well.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting about The Killer and Hard Boiled is those themes, like, again, like with everything that John Woo does, it's not very subtle, but he's building in these themes of friendship and loyalty and understanding, and he's not dividing them along the easy lines of cops and robbers, basically. So he's crossing those lines and showing how in this film and Hard Boiled, like you have the assassin with a heart of gold, and you have the cop who's trying to do the right thing versus the bad cops and the really bad criminals. And in Hard Boiled, those lines get even more crossed as you have double agents and double agents and all kinds of stuff.
Yes, it gets the plot gets complicated, which I think
Yeah.
we should mention is probably sort of a John Woo signature as well. Is a lot of it's like a lot of kind of low concept film techniques mixed with a lot of high concept plot.
Yeah.
Which is a
That makes
unique
sense.
blend we don't see very often. But I think all four of the movies we're talking about today are very heavy on the plot. And then you can also just zone out on the plot entirely and still enjoy the movie.
Just watch it, yeah.
And just watch it and just like zonk on it, and it will still be a really hard time. Or a really fun time, I should say, not a hard time.
Hard time for the characters.
Hard time for the
Hard time
characters.
for the characters.
Yeah, the characters, whew, man, there are so many bullets.
Although
Yeah.
I will say, and this goes into all of them, so I have it in overall notes. But these films are like the epitome of the infinite ammo tropes, and also like pain does not exist for these characters unless it serves the pathos of a scene. And so like the most insane things are happening, bullets are flying everywhere, and then they're like at the end of the scene, they'll make it more dramatic by saying, you have one bullet left. But it doesn't matter because they've shot like 50 bullets from one handgun.
You mean a handgun can't hold 50 bullets?
They do have some Uzis, though. Like, they've got a lot of guns in these movies.
So many guns. Whew,
And this
boy.
is, like, The Killer and Hard Boiled, I watched these, and I was like, oh, so that's where The Matrix comes from.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah,
I
basically.
love The Matrix, and I was like, this is where everything I love in The Matrix came from.
Yes. Yep. Including the really, really complicated plot.
Yeah, it's true. The Matrix just weaves it in with a little more gravitas, I think.
At least in the first one.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, anything else to say specifically about The Killer, or do you want to move on to Hard Boiled?
No, let's go to Hard Boiled.
All right, Hard Boiled from 1992. Jason, take it away.
Hard Boiled from 1992. Inspector Tequila Wynn's partner is killed during a shootout with a gang of gun smugglers. Thoroughly unhinged, he joins forces with a mob hitman who's actually an undercover cop to blast their way to a brutal justice.
So Hard Boiled is very similar, but almost like takes it up a notch, like almost to 11, maybe 10.5.
Oh man, it just goes so hard.
There's a and this
so
one is
hard.
like, I put a question in here because this one almost like crosses a line from melodrama just to straight excess, which is like,
Yeah.
melodrama is kind of based on excess, but this one gets to the point where it's like, even in the film, the bad guy is like murdering innocent people in a hospital, and like the bad guys own like the really tough fighter in the gang is like, dude, this is too much, like calm down. Like the movie knows that it's
Yeah.
going too far.
Yeah, which is interesting. It's definitely like because just the fact that like his henchman is commenting on it is reacting in that way is a sign that it's intentional, right?
It's a
That he is-
self-awareness, yeah.
Yeah, it's a self-awareness. It's like, yes, this is excessive. But yeah, I guess John Woo just got bigger and bigger. Just had to keep going. But I don't dislike it. It's definitely like the most. It's one of the
It's
most.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
One
know,
of the posters for
sometimes-
the film would just kind of like sums it up, because it's literally Chow Yun Fat like holding a baby in one hand and a gun in the other hand, and that's like where the film gets to. It's like this is at the point where we're putting babies in danger in order for like basically, are you not entertained kind of a thing.
Yeah, that baby is very in danger. Oh boy. I was not expecting the baby to be a plot point in the way that it was. I thought it was going to be about, like, when I saw the poster, I thought it was going to be about, like, saving a baby specifically because,
I thought it was
somebody...
going to be like the pacifier, like, bad, like tough guy has to care for kids or something.
But no, the baby was kind of just a MacGuffin.
But it was so obvious.
More action.
They're just like, we're just going to make these babies so in danger that the audience can't help but be terrified for them.
Yeah. It's 100% like, you know what it is? It's like somebody who understands what ingredients need to be in a recipe, but doesn't quite understand how much.
The quantities, yeah.
Like, he put 5 packets of taco seasoning into 1 tray of meat, and like, it's not...
5 babies isn't enough. Let's do 30 babies.
It's not bad. It's just intense. And you know what? I kind of love it. Because there's so many people who understand that. Let me put it this way. There's not a lot of people who understand film techniques and film language as well as John Woo. Like, seriously is like we talk. I know we talk a lot about a lot of directors, and there's a lot of directors that we haven't gotten to yet. There's a whole backlog. There's a lot of really good directors, but you have to understand that the directors we talk about are normally like the top, like,
there are
1 to
5%
of directors who are amazing at what they do and really understand the film language. And even out of those, there's a lot that we talk about who are proficient in other things but don't quite understand the film rhetoric in the same way that, like, the best of the best do. And John Woo definitely understands it super, super, super well. So he's a rare breed. But after that, like, just to see him go ham with it is such a novelty, and I love it. I love it. Yeah. Because he just goes so hard. It's such a fun what if.
And I do want to say that, like, the babies are the climax, right? So that's just the clearest example of what we're talking about. So, but throughout the film, there are other instances of that, like when the undercover cop, who we don't know is an undercover cop, and the cop that we are following doesn't know that he's an undercop. They just think he's a gangster. Just like mows down an entire gang to prove his loyalty to another gang. And then you like realize that, oh, that's like an internal confliction for this guy, because he's actually trying to, I mean, I guess in one way it serves his purpose in both ways, but still, like, he doesn't want to just kill all these people. And so there's a lot of these interesting, again, these moral dilemmas and these crossing the line between the good guy and the bad guy, and where, what does your label make you the good guy or the bad guy, or what you actually care about, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much meant to be a flip-flop of the trope he had going in earlier heroic bloodshed movies, which was almost always centered on a criminal or a bad guy, so to speak. Especially A Better Tomorrow and A Better Tomorrow 2, which are both very criminal-centric. The Killer has both in it, but in Hard Boiled, we have 2 cops who are the main characters, and then just an intense amount of action. And we already talked about the film rhetoric being really good, but we should say, like, Woo's understanding of choreography is unparalleled. Like, he's so good at it. I mean, there is like a 2-minute long take of the 2 characters fighting their way through the hospital. And there's like part of it where they're in an elevator, like they change floors and they're fighting in the hospital and interacting with one another and having a dialogue at the same time. And none of it feels forced. It all feels very like within the story. The action's really, really like tense. The dialogue interchange is meaningful. They even slow down the take and let it linger on our undercover cop's face for a moment when we see him really like struggling there for a second in the elevator. And then, man, the one part I really love of the long take is when they exit the elevator and they almost just without looking, just shoot the two guys there.
Yeah.
And again, like it's almost like what we were talking about earlier. Like, man, wouldn't it be so cool if we just did this, but like done so well?
Yeah.
Done so well.
Yeah. It's crazy.
We should also talk about, this is kind of reminded me a little bit of The Departed.
Okay. Yeah.
A little bit of it. It's like a proto Departed. It doesn't have the formula completely intact, right? Because one of them isn't a criminal and they're working together, but like kind of like that story of a deep undercover cop who's so deep in a gang that nobody else knows about him. Like
right.
that kind of feels really familiar.
Which is what Face Off takes to the extreme, basically.
Yeah, Face Off takes that to the extreme. Like, what if you're so undercover you just wear another dude's face?
Yeah. You literally are the other person.
But I do want to take a quick moment and plug another film that's kind of related to John Woo. It's John Woo adjacent. It's called Infernal Affairs from 2007. And it's actually, or I don't know if it's from 2007. I think it's from earlier. But it's what The Departed's based on. The Departed is a remake of Infernal Affairs. But Infernal Affairs feels a lot like a John Woo movie. 2002, there you go. But it feels a lot like a John Woo movie. Of course, slowed down because nobody's as big as John Woo.
Yeah, it has Tony Leung in it.
Oh man, he kills it in that movie. He's so good.
Yeah, and I guess like in The Killer and Hard Boiled, we can bring it up, although it definitely applies to probably every single John Woo film. But another one of these elements that he uses and that he can just like bring out on the at the drop of a hat is a Mexican standoff. Like he will use any excuse
yes.
to implement a Mexican standoff.
And now, of course, I'm just thinking of the rocket jump short.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like Rocket Jump has so many shorts that are like, they just watched a John Woo movie, right? And we're
Rocket
like, you know what?
Jump is just John Woo.
Rocket Jump is literally just John Woo. I think they started with that cardboard war, which is like the same thing.
I am sure too that if you look hard enough, we can find something where they talk about it. Like,
yeah,
I don't remember that. I think I might have remembered somebody telling me something like that at some point. It feels familiar, but like, yeah. Now having done like this deep dive into John Woo, yes, 100%.
Yeah. I bet if I went back and listened to their old Face Rocker podcast, they would bring it up a lot because they would talk about a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's so clear, like that's everything that they love to do. But all they had to do was turn it into 3 minutes and take out all the sappy stuff and just do like the cool action stuff.
Yes, exactly. The advantages of YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
We should also mention before we move on that this has a really interesting sequel, Hard Boiled. It has a sequel from 2007 that John Woo was involved in. That was a video game called Stranglehold. And I didn't look up any gameplay footage. I just looked up some reviews of it. And apparently it was actually pretty decent at like translating this kind of gun fu action for the technology at the time in 2007, which in video game terms is kind of old. It's a few graphic generations back, but it apparently was not terrible. So yeah, if you really love John Woo and you were like, oh man, I'd love to play a John Woo video game, there you go, 2007, Stranglehold.
All right, interesting.
All right, let's move on to Face Off from 1997. All right, Jason, take it away.
Face Off from 1997. Castor Troy is a terrorist menace. In the past, he attempted to kill the man closest to catching him, Agent Sean Archer, but only managed to kill his young son instead. After finally capturing the criminal, Agent Archer decides to surgically swap faces with the man who murdered his child in order to prevent his remaining planted bombs from killing more people. There's just one catch. The terrorist Troy wakes up and runs off with Agent Archer's face.
This movie is nuts. Let's just start with that.
This movie is so much.
Yeah, but it's also like it kind of encapsulates this like really special pocket of sci-fi, I think, in the 90s. Like John Woo also did Paycheck, which we're not covering today, but that's also like its own like part of this genre of like really high concept sci-fi where it's like we have one thing, let's build a movie about this. Like what if two guys swapped their literal faces onto each other's bodies? Or in Paycheck, oh gosh, I don't even remember all the intricacies of what happens in Paycheck. But there were like all these movies that did not take themselves too seriously or seriously at all. And they were just like, we have this one idea and let's just have some fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is it is wild. It takes, like you said, it takes one concept and runs with it. And then it's a lot. This might be I mean, we haven't done a deep dive on Nick Cage, but this might be one of those movies that really has become identifiable as Nick Cage is like a crazy person.
Yeah.
On screen. Because I think the last Nick Cage movie we did on the show was Adaptation.
Yeah,
which was good, but this one
that was much more serious.
That was much more serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, even that one had some wild Nick Cage moments in it. But this one is Nick Cage just at his most.
This is also, I feel like there's also like an entire category for movies with this type of bad guy. Like the bad guy who's just so flagrantly bad and loves being bad. Like I think of Gary Oldman's character in The Fifth Element, or what was the other one I was thinking of? There are several of these where it's just like the bad guy is just like having fun being the bad guy, and you just want to watch the really serious cop with personal issues just go after him, and then he becomes a better person by the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Speed is almost like that too. There's another movie though that's like focused on the bad guy. I can't remember it.
The 90s, man. I can't tell you.
There are a lot of them.
It's a wild time. It's a wild time, and this is 100% like within that time frame, within that mood. And this is, I mean, we mentioned before some of the production problems that John Woo had when he came to America. The sensibility was different. The control from the studio was more, but the budget was bigger. And this film is kind of getting all of those elements in sync. And woo boy does it. Woo boy does it.
Woo boy.
I get it. Anyway. But yeah, it's like, what if we could have that melodrama, but one, it's in English. So we...
Yeah.
So for our American noggins, we or American ES first language, English is first language speakers. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Anyway, it hits the melodrama feels more present. I think there is something in the first two movies we talked about today where the melodrama is almost padded by the sense that you get the emotion, but not necessarily the meaning from the speech. You get the meaning from the dialogue.
Yeah.
So
I
you're
almost
reading.
think the melodrama takes a backseat in this one compared to the first two, because I think if this was more melodramatic,
Yes, for sure,
there would be more of a, like, obviously the relationship with the wife like plays a big part. It took me the entire freaking movie to realize that was Pam Landy from The Bourne Supremacy. But the relationship with the wife could have been hammed up a lot more. Like, they mention the whole, like, we've been living as man and wife, but it's really like just to illustrate how evil the guy is. Like, it's really just about these two guys and the action that has to happen to get them to get the situation resolved.
Yeah. It is. That makes sense. There are definitely, it definitely feels like more phase shifty. Like, it feels like the elements, the production elements feel more blended, but very much in kind of like this second half of the 20th century American production kind of way. It feels kind of phase shifty, where it's almost like, okay, this sequence is going to be melodramatic, where we focus on the home and the relationship between these guys incognito and their enemies, significant others, and then we switch to just then we go for 30 minutes of straight action, and then at the very end we get a touch of melodrama again, or back and forth, or the melodrama comes in little moments too, at the end. I don't know why, but this line doesn't really land for me, and it feels really funny, where Nick Cage, still with, or John Travolta's character, still with Nick Cage's face, is like, Doc, you can take away the scar now. It just felt silly. It was like, I get what you're going for, but like that moment was a little more melodramatic than it needed to be.
That's true.
Which made it feel silly.
There are some of those like theme elements in here, but they feel like an afterthought. Like the whole thing where his daughter is like, you know, she's goth one week and then she's, you know, she like putting on all these different, going through phases, but like really quickly. And they have this whole thing where it's like, you're putting on another face to avoid who you truly are. And it's like, okay, I get it. That's what the whole movie's about. But that was like a throwaway thing. Like it didn't actually make a difference in the movie. So they're trying to hit on some of these things, but there's just like the format is not really set up in this film to be something that's actually serious or deep.
Yeah.
Although I will say, from the very first scene, I started asking myself, this would be so different if like a Christopher Nolan had directed it. And I started like immediately wondering how this could be Nolanized. But the thing is, the very first scene where, you know, there's the shot where Nick Cage shoots John Travolta and the bullet goes through him and kills his son and stuff like that. I thought, so that ends up being a flashback, and then we go 6 years in the future. He's been hunting this guy forever, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, what if that is one of those things where they put the last scene at the beginning and you don't know that it's actually their face swapped, and somehow, you know, John Travolta got stuck with Nick Cage's face and now he's trying to take out the bad guy who's living his life. And I was like, you could do this whole timeline swapping thing and you don't know who is which character until like the very end. And I was like, Christopher Nolan could have had a field day with this, but it's much more straightforward in this version.
Oh no, man, that sounds maybe too complicated for a Christopher Nolan movie even.
Nothing is too complicated for Christopher Nolan.
But I mean, that does sound pretty intense. But yeah, this one's plot heavy, but it is very followable. Like we mentioned before, actually, with the emotion being able to translate stuff almost better than the dialogue can translate in John Woo movies, just because of the size of it. Maybe I think he is better at handling some of the more convoluted plots that would leave you scratching your head if you read it on paper.
Which is probably why he had to get it revised so many times.
Yeah, by just making it so big. But yeah, this is a special little movie here. It's a weird intersection of a lot of different things, and it is maybe the best sample of John Woo's Hollywood days. It's certainly the most successful movie from John Woo's Hollywood days.
Yeah.
So far, I guess, because he's coming back for more. But from that period of the 90s to the early 2000s, 20
I do think I remember Rocket Jump talking about this movie and raving about it.
That would make sense. It's just a fun movie. Like
it is. It's very fun.
It's in places like it's smart and well done overall, but there are definitely places where it's just kind of like stupid fun.
Yeah.
Like the Nicolas Cage intro.
Like, yeah, Nick Cage with his like his flowy robe and his gold pistols, and he's just going nuts.
He's such a weird over the top character, just going to ham, and it walks that line. It does feel like too much, but it truly walks that line of actually being too much.
Yeah, but it's because it's consistent. Because the whole movie is that way. It like all blends together. It doesn't feel like Nicolas Cage is in a different movie from John Travolta. And especially like I was concerned with the way that, you know, they were going to pull off the whole swapping bodies and stuff. And there's a lot of technical things that really don't work if you think about them, but that's not the point. But Nick Cage and John Travolta playing each other actually worked out pretty well. Like taking on each other's personalities and mannerisms.
They both have kind of an equally hairy body.
Yeah. There are a lot of aspects of them that do not look similar at all. But
yeah, there's a large element to this one specifically that is just like suspension of disbelief.
Yeah. There were some things in there that they shouldn't have even mentioned, because there was something like he's like, I put a voice box in your larynx that will make you sound like Castor Troy, but if you get jostled at all, it won't so I was expecting the whole time for Nicolas Cage's voice to start coming out of John Travolta's body or vice versa. And that never happened, even though they both got thrown around massively all the time. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a just watch and go along with it.
It is, it's a special kind. Again, that kind of like suspension of disbelief goes into kind of like the just having fun with a camera aspect of this. This one's significantly less gun-fooey than the previous two, but there still are those elements to the gunplay where it feels much more personal, much more specific than some of the other gun-based American movies. Well, way more personal and fighty than a lot of American-based gun movies. I will also say that there is a giant speedboat chase in this movie.
There is a speedboat chase.
Which is wild. And there was something else I was watching recently that was a Chinese movie that had a speedboat chase in it, and I'm trying to remember what it was. But yeah, it might have been Infernal Affairs. But yeah, there was just a lot of speedboats in the prep for this.
There was actually
episode.
a speedboat in The Killer too, because after he does he assassinates the one politician guy.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about, The Killer.
So it's a John Woo thing.
Yep. He's into speedboats too. Yep. But this time he got to do speedboat on like an American budget where he could freaking fly the thing off a ramp.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it takes a very prominent role in the climax of this movie. Also, an airplane chase, where the helicopter is like trying to stop the airplane, and like they're doing this, like they ruined both of those vehicles.
Oh, 100%. Yes, that was.
This is get a team of animators to show an airplane blowing up.
This is pay $100 million in VFX just to fix wrinkles on actors' faces.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they take the concepts, they run with them, they don't ask you to analyze them too much, but they still like build in some of those elements. Like he is still building on some of those elements of like loyalty and friendship and trust, obviously, where his wife and daughter have to learn how to trust him with someone else's face on it, and he builds relationships. Our detective character builds relationships with the bad guys, which was actually a pretty interesting scene where he's like trying to blend in, but also like he has a conscience and he's trying to act like someone who doesn't have a conscience. And then the bringing in the other kid was, again, kind of saccharine, but also kind of worked.
Yeah. At first I was a little eye-rolly, but like where they went with it wasn't as... eye roll as I thought it was going to be. It turned out being A-okay. A little melodramatic, but that's the brand.
Yeah, and the inclusion of the brother character for Nicolas Cage was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was important to give him something that he cared
something
about.
that he actually cared about, yeah.
Yeah, it was just a very strange relationship.
Yeah.
Of course, Castor and Pollux, I get where that's going. That's very sci-fi namey. Naming after Greek entities like that.
Yeah, I kind of wonder what some of the things were that John Woo would have rejected. Like, you almost feel like the script could have been originally way more dark, like in terms of the relationship with the wife and stuff like that. And maybe those are the things that John Woo was like, yeah, no, let's focus this more on the, the backstabbing and the undercover and stuff. But it turned out well. I mean, it's like I said, it's basically a fun ride. It's not as over the top with the gun stuff. It's a little bit more on plot stuff and sci-fi stuff that really doesn't matter. But it's thoroughly enjoyable start to finish.
Yeah, no, it is a very, very, very fun watch. And it is edged just ever closer to doing a Nicolas Cage episode. But
you know who
today's not that day.
The other crazy bad guy that I was thinking is Antonio Banderas in the movie Assassins with Sylvester Stallone. He's just like off his rocker crazy in that movie.
Oh yeah.
But also, actually, speaking of Sylvester Stallone, I think one of the first pairing choices for the characters was Stallone and Schwarzenegger, which would have made this a very different movie. But also, I could totally see that working.
Yeah, no, it would have been a very different movie, but it would have been the equal, but it also would have fallen into the same kind of like little stupid but very fun category.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe
Which
with those
they've
two
each
very
done their
stupid, but
share
really
of
fun.
those kind of movies. So I think if they teamed up on one, it would be a lot of fun.
Oh, for sure. All right, Jonathan, do you want to move on to Red Cliff from 2008?
Yeah, let's talk about Red Cliff. Jason, set us up.
Red Cliff from 2008. This is the saga following a fictionalized account of the Battle of Red Cliffs that marked the start of the Three Kingdoms period in China's history. In the north is Cao Cao, a usurping chancellor bent on dominating all of China. In the south, across the mighty Yangtze River, are Liu Bei and Sun Quan, who form a rushed alliance to hold the would-be conqueror at bay. What ensues is one of the largest river battles to ever take place, with clever tactics, mighty clashes of soldiers, and amazing action from individual heroes.
All right, Jonathan. So this one is released weird, but it's not too complicated. But it is released multiple times, and so we should point out that there is both the domestic release within China, which was broken into two parts, both of which was over 2.5 hours long.
Yep.
And then there was the international release, which was itself 2.5 hours long.
Yep. For both versions. And that's the one that you're going to find if you watch it on Amazon Prime or any other streaming service, if you're based in the US.
Yeah. And I've watched both by now.
I only watched the long one, so I'm excited for you to tell me what they cut out.
They cut out a lot. And then overall, I'll just say that the editing is way better. And that's probably just because they cut out a lot.
Yeah. I did read that the shortened version was actually a good choice.
The shortened version is a great choice. It should have been like 1 3-hour movie. That's what it should have been. Okay. And maybe even less than that. But yeah, there's like a totally different feel to the international release. The international release feels more dramatic. It feels a little more epic. And then the 2-part release feels a little clunkier in a way. Like there's too much space in there. Let me put it that way. There's too much space.
I did notice there's a lot of things that are like set up and not satisfactorily paid off.
Yeah, they cut out a lot of that.
I did read that they're to some extent these characters and stuff are kind of like national heroes, like almost to the point of mythology. So like people understand these stories in China more than we do from a Western background. So I was like, maybe some of these things that are being set up, like I'm already supposed to know something about them and I don't need the whole story. But as a Westerner, I needed more.
Could you give me an example? I'm a little more familiar with the story of Red Cliffs. So maybe I have watched both versions of this at film adaptation. So maybe I can fill in some blanks or.
Okay, yeah, there were a couple of specifics. There's like one of the very first scenes where the guy catches the baby and then hands the baby back, but I don't think the baby ever came into play later, except for the fact that he then catches his wife in the same way at the end of the movie. I don't know if that was just like a rhetorical type callback or if that baby was important.
I believe that was just a rhetorical callback.
Okay.
For the most part, the legendary figures are like the three big guys.
Okay. I called them the Mighty Men. Like there were several of them that are like, these guys each have like their thing. They're like, they're like the Avengers of the story.
Yeah, they're anime characters. There's
basically,
but yeah, the three leaders. So there's the northern guy who's portrayed very evilly, which I mean honestly is not inaccurate based on just some of like the historical accounts.
Cao Cao or the emperor who commissions
Cao Cao.
Okay, yeah.
Cao Cao. And then Liu Bei and Sun Quan.
Yeah.
are kind of they're kind of like the three big historical figures, and then a lot of other people might have been mentioned in places, but they don't have the same kind of legendary status as those three. Especially Liu Bei. Liu Bei is like a big like historical. Historically he existed, but he's like a really big like legendary figure as well.
Okay.
You'll
Almost
find
like
a lot
a
of characters.
King Arthur.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, kind of like resisting the invaders and stuff like that.
Okay.
And they're kind of seen as the ones. Him and Sun Quan are basically, especially in this movie, which is kind of like the story of national pride, like you were saying, sort of like the Alamo. They're the ones who hold out against like this evil, usurping minister, not even an emperor. And they show that in the opening that Xiao Xiao is kind of dominating the emperor. And guess what? His family does eventually overthrow the emperor, but they get overthrown in turn, which is ironic.
Which is history. That's how history goes.
Yeah,
all the time.
I mean, it happened in France. It happened in China.
England. We're talking about Shakespeare next month.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of historical stuff, which is fun for me because I like history. But yes,
I guess one of the other things that I was like,
a lot of
like the horse birth
small
was
things.
kind of small.
The horse birth, I don't know where that came from. It feels like it could be part of like an Eastern style myth or folktale, but it's not like a super popular one or popular enough to filter out into like Chinese podcast or Chinese history podcast or stuff like that. So it felt like just an element. It felt like it was in the folklore mythic style.
Yeah.
But
just another like element of drama, I guess, to add in there.
So the funny thing with this movie is that the Battle of Red Cliffs is so interesting from a strategic standpoint and so huge in scale, and this movie had so much money behind it that you think they wouldn't spend all this time on stuff that isn't the Battle of Red Cliffs.
Yeah, right.
But they really do. They really, really, really do.
And it's not stuff like I mean, knowing
there's a soccer arc.
I know. So yeah, that's the thing is like I am a fan of extended editions in certain instances. Obviously, like we've talked about Lord of the Rings before. I love the extended Lord of the Rings because I feel like there's a lot of character development. It makes it feel like a journey because the film is about a journey. Like it's supposed to feel long and going through this whole process. But all the like extra stuff in this film didn't really add to the primary like arc that we're going through.
Yeah, it is. I just a quick Google. Mang Mang the horse is not a legend.
Not important. Okay.
Yeah. It's a.
It was more just like a pacifist kind of thing. It was like, just don't let this horse grow up to be a war horse.
Yeah. There are a few good moments in there where like you could just focus on like fleshing out these characters as like characters and people. Yeah. But then they go so ham with it. There's like the whole tiger hunt that gets cut.
The tiger hunt gets cut? Release. See, I thought that actually had at least some better thematic relevance because the Cao Cao's like symbol is a tiger.
He is a tiger, yes. Yeah. And that does make sense, but yeah, that is cut. They cut out a lot of the spy stuff with so-and-so's sister.
Oh, really? With the piggy thing?
Yeah, she's still a spy. She still like infiltrates the enemy and sends stuff back. But it's in the like international release, there's a lot of time spent on that, and there's way less time spent in the.
The other thing is the typhoid soldiers. Like that never really became like the fact. I guess it just showed how evil Cao Cao was that he was making them fight, even though they had typhoid. But it wasn't like the fact that they had typhoid didn't really have an effect on their ability, or we didn't see that very much. Yeah.
That was an interesting choice, mostly just because like you could have shown his soldiers as really suffering from that and it changed the tone of the whole story, but the image they're going for here is very glossy. I hesitate to use the word propaganda just because like I don't think that like because every culture, every country has stories of like national relevance and like historical or like legendary relevance, and they tend to portray their own history or historical achievements in like fairly positive lights. And I
It's
don't
like us
think
making a revolution, like a movie about the revolution.
yeah. Like calling the Patriot like overly glossy would be weird, right? Like,
Right.
I don't think this is overly glossy. I think it's appropriate for what it's going for, but it does have like that weird like dissonance where you do fall short of some where you have to portray some historical things like a typhoid outbreak, but then you can't show like the impact of a typhoid outbreak because it's too dissonant from what the theme or the tone you're going for. So now you're kind of caught in that bubble like that. But we will say all the trappings are a bit much, right? And there is definitely like, especially with the 2-part version that you watched, like, whoa, they should have cut a lot of it, and they did. They did cut a lot of it. The international release is really worth a watch. It's on Amazon and other places, and it's good. And in fact, Jonathan, like you were saying, with historical context, there is a much longer intro to the international release that goes into the historical setup for Redcliffe.
With a Kate Blanchett voiceover?
No, but there is an English voiceover version that exists. It's like some dramatic dude, but yeah, the international release is built to kind of bridge that gap.
Right. Give some context.
But yeah, but the point of this movie is the fighting.
Yeah.
And
the honor in the warriors and all that kind of stuff, which is definitely in there.
And telegraph through the fighting, which makes for good fighting. And we talked about that before. When fighting's just fighting, it can only be so interesting. When fighting has like relative importance, then and we understand the motivations, then you're telling a story through a fight, and that's important. So knowing that, like, just the basic setup of like these people defending their home from an invader is a motivating thing that makes every bit of fighting way more interesting. But the fighting choreography is just really good, really inventive, really fun.
Oh, yeah.
It's based around a lot of like mythical, like trickster style. Like,
I was say a lot of it seems
shield.
a little caricatured, like the way he catches all the arrows in his
that is a big part of the
like
legend. That's I'm sure it's very obvious even if you haven't heard the legend of or the story of Redcliffe's, but that is a huge part of the story.
And the way that they use the fire, and they know which way the wind is going, like it all feels like very legendary, like to some extent almost to the point of disbelief, but you can almost see where like a real battle could have inspired such like really dramatic interpretations through word of mouth and oral history and that kind of stuff.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, the way legends transfer down through the ages. For
it's
sure.
It's almost Homeric in that way.
Oh, very, very much so.
Yeah. It's really epic,
so.
and like even the turtle formation is like so perfectly executed that there's no way that would ever work, but like in that specific way. But you get the idea. Like they had this really wild technique that they wanted to use, and here's what it would look like if it had come off perfectly. And they may have won the battle, but I'm sure it did not go off so incredibly flawlessly.
Don't knock the Tetsuo. The Tetsuo is a cornerstone foundation.
It was pretty great. I will say though, for some of the instances like that, like where that battle where they're intercepting the Cao Cao's land army, there was some instances where like the geography was a little confused to me. Like I didn't know where that was in relation to Redcliffe exactly.
I had no idea.
And same thing when they were fleeing Cao Cao at the very beginning. They're showing fighting happening in the city, outside the city, and then in these cliffs into like a mountain. And I don't know how all these things are related, but
which is interesting because within the smaller like arenas, the the geography is fairly easy to figure out.
When you're watching a fight between people, you understand exactly where everyone is because you have to understand the fighting styles and techniques that they're using. But like the little pockets of events are sometimes just like isolated in like, this is in a field, this is in a mountain, this is in a city. They're all close to each other, but I'm not sure where. But I will say though that the way that they set up, yes, that narrows it down. So the way that they set up the main, Battle of Red Cliffs is really straightforward. You've got the Red Cliff on one side and you've got Cao Cao's army on the other side, like directly opposed, and they're all within this channel. And so that makes it really easy to just keep the whole thing straight.
Yeah. This side, that side. I think that's one of the reasons too that Red Cliff is so apocryphal and so legendary, is because it was literally on this. Yeah, it's a fight literally at a border, and a very well defined border too. Not just like some field somewhere that somebody decided, but no, it's like this. It's a major river. It's at a major like landmark on the river with the cliffs, and it's a very good geographic setup for that kind of story. And like we've been saying, we totally see how this story has become so legendary, right? Like this is such a good setup for it. And then of course it then becomes easy to add all these really colorful characters, because man, are they very, very unique in each in their own way. They've all got their own attitude, their own like
facial
haircuts
hair
and stuff.
The wild guy who
hair.
just pushes horses and he's got like his beard shooting out every side of his face.
I love that guy. He might be my favorite.
They also and this is simplistic, but from a Westerner's perspective, like you could see all of these types of legends and you see how they get distilled into something similar like Mulan, where you have like, okay, I remember some of these kind of caricatures.
Yeah, I mean, there's literally a Mulan arc.
There is a Mulan arc, yeah.
in the movie, which is the spy arc. But I will say one of the things that I was really impressed with in this movie, and I was knocking around in my noggin just because I also watched Wind Talkers while prepping for this episode. And Wind Talkers does a better job of it than most, but there is a problem in Western American movies, especially ones where like the army soldiers we're seeing, like the U.S. Army soldiers, are like all white dudes, where specifically like movies from like the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Oh, yeah.
Like I just watched A Bridge Too Far as well, and it really suffers from this, where it's a bunch of white dudes with the same haircut in the same uniform, and I'm like, I don't know who's who anymore.
Yeah,
like,
and when you put a helmet on them, it's even worse.
Dude, like you don't realize how similar all human faces are until you like average out everything else, and you're like, oh, they're really, 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 really similar. And this easily could have been that because it's an army movie, but they give everyone such distinct style that for the most part, everyone stands out, whether it be color coding or giving someone like a big old like poofy mountain gorilla beard. I love that guy so much. He's so distinct. I think that's maybe one of the reasons why I like him so much.
He settles everything just by yelling.
He yells and then he just throws himself at people.
Yeah.
Like just wild man. Appreciate it. All right, Jonathan. I do really recommend that you check out the international release if you have the time. It is worth a watch, and it does feel very different. Yeah,
that's interesting. Because a lot of times, like we do talk about how trimming things out can often clarify better, and I think there are instances where a story needs more than a traditional kind of theatrical runtime, but sometimes it needs less.
Yeah, so you almost or you should always leave something on the cutting room floor. It's very rare that you won't, and you gotta be willing to do that. You gotta delete your art. We're not going there. We don't need more Snyder cuts. Just because the studio doesn't know how to cut a movie doesn't mean that you need all of the scenes.
Oh, here's the last thing I want to bring up about Red Cliff and kind of get your take on it, Alex, because we kind of get, I don't think it's fleshed out well enough, but we get a little bit of this motivation of Cao Cao of like starting this whole conquering thing because of is it Liu Bei's wife or which of the guys?
It was really weird. It was really weird, and that
it wasn't very like. Cao Cao never talks about it except for like this one picture that he has of her, and then he tries to make the dancer into his image of her. But it's like at the very beginning, all we kind of get is that Cao Cao wants to take over. I'm not sure how taking over is going to win the woman he wants, or he didn't seem very concerned about it, except for the fact that the movie told us that that was his motivation.
It was weird and unnecessary, and maybe I'm blanking on it, but I don't think that's in the international cut.
Oh, really? Because that's I mean, it was kind of built up to be important, but it also wasn't fleshed out like it was important.
Yeah, and it's with the historical context of the battle, like it's totally unnecessary and weird. It feels like an attempt at like grounding the movie in some kind of human reality, like a lot of the side stories are, but it's strange.
Yeah, but there were some interesting moments of our main generals and the way that they are learning each other's techniques and styles, and even like the scene where they're playing music and they can kind of sense each other's emotions and like what their decisions are going to be based on the way that they're playing their music, which also felt like very kind of legendary.
Oh, very much so.
So yeah,
it reminded me of that movie that came out like a few years ago. It was like a wuxia film that everyone was really excited for. It had a lot of instrument playing in it. What was it? Shadow and Ash? Ash and Shadow?
There was one just called Shadow.
Shadow, that was it.
Yeah.
That one had a lot of
Speaking of stylistic films, that was a very stylistic film.
But yes, Redcliffe. It is a very big, fun, epic war movie, which is surprising considering the amount of human suffering that should be in it. It is surprisingly fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, the international release definitely is worth a watch. If you want to dig them up, you can watch the domestic release. But it might be, you could save 2 hours and get the same story cut a little better. So yeah. I would recommend the international release.
And the international release is pretty available. It's on some of the common free sites right now, I think, and also Amazon and stuff like that. So you should be. It's not too hard to find.
Or subscription sites.
Right.
They're only free if you get the password from your mom.
Well, there are some like the library sites like Hoopla and Canopy, I think, have it right now. So it's
I gotcha.
It's out there. Anyway, let's move on to overall notes, shall we?
We shall. And of course, we should talk about some of the themes involved in John Woo movies, which tend to be pretty consistent, regardless of like the overarching setting, whether it's whatever time period Face Off takes place in, Red Cliffs, or the honorable bloodshed world of Hong Kong in the 80s. Tends to center around themes of like loyalty and betrayal, which makes sense when you start off with like gangster movies, right?
Yeah.
But that continued to pervade his work even as he moved to his American projects and beyond that.
Actually, speaking of, I want to say that I saw somewhere one of the movies was like inspired by White Heat. Was that
White Heat would make a lot of sense for almost any of these movies.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's very similar to stuff we were talking about last month, except that here you are tested by the things that you are actually care about, and like regardless of how those motivations direct your actions, whether you're on the side of a criminal or the law enforcement, quote unquote. There are a lot of the similar themes to the gangster films, but with more injection of like honor and the good guys being rewarded or at least like mourned if they don't end up winning in the end, as opposed to kind of glorifying the criminals because they're so cool.
Yeah, exactly. He does a pretty good job of focusing in on like human characteristics and like human motivations, so that even though he does tend to use tropes and like archetypes to kind of construct like the basics of a character, or really to help the audience understand the basics of a character, there is still a human core that transcends like just like easy categorization.
Yeah,
in most
it always
of these
comes
characters.
back to heart.
Yeah, unless you're that weird soccer playing dude from Red Cliff,
The one who strikes up the
one who's
friendship.
just a dope.
Yeah, and then becomes a general. But
He's like,
he
"What?"
becomes a general because he's good at playing soccer.
Yeah,
And then he like strikes up the relationship with the sister. And
hey, why is everyone trying to kill you? You're not a traitor. You're my friend.
did they have that in the international cut? Because that whole scene where he dies and she's, like devastated.
They don't have the start of their friendship. They just have the end of their friendship.
How?
They're just kind of shown in media res as already being friends.
Oh, interesting.
And then there's like a little soccer, and then like, oh, they're friendly.
Because I was
And
going to
then
say, you
later
can't
on-
cut the part where he dies because that's the whole motivation for the line. There are no winners here, which was really interesting aspect of the battle, like just showing that war ultimately is a lose-lose situation no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, they keep like the important bits towards the end, but a lot of the extra space. Let me put it this way: there is a lot of extra space that is kind of added,
Yeah.
to accommodate. But yeah, it's trimmed down quite a bit. He's still there. He's just trimmed.
Okay. Yeah, but like things we've already been talking about are the very clear visual style. He uses a lot of dramatic crossfades for the really dramatic scenes.
Yeah, not worried about hiding his camera work.
Uses the slow motion. There are like semi wuxia elements to the kung fu. Again, in ways that like, if you're familiar with the Matrix, this is where all that's coming from. It's just like, it's very flowy action, very intense, very cool. Again, complete disregard for ammunition limits, complete disregard for pain, no matter how many times you've been shot or where, which I always find interesting.
Funny that
Like,
we're
you just
talking
got
about that, 'cause
shot in the shoulder, and now you're like lifting a person out of a building. Like, muscles don't work like that.
If you have enough adrenaline pumping, you could keep going.
Maybe, yeah.
As long as the muscle you need to lift isn't the one that was shot. I mean, even if it was shot, you could probably still operate it. It would just be an immense amount of pain. But yeah, no, a lot of these are basically animes, but Red Cliff especially is just mostly an anime. Even like the way they transition between like really goofy scene to really serious scene is very anime. But yeah, no, that's very accurate. Very heavy, very realistic style, or very in-your-face styles, but still well done, which is surprising because normally when we say in-your-face, we don't normally mean good. But in this case, we do mean good. It's just big. It's like your grandma trying to read her phone.
But it's done with such like heart and enthusiasm that it invites imitation, which is why we see influence, like we were talking about at the beginning, on younger generation, like Rocket Jump, like YouTube creators who could just take those fun bits and recreate them, but also on other directors like Tarantino, which you could see in the violence, and Rodriguez. They kind of go hand in hand on the amount of over-the-top violence and bloodshed. Also the Wachowskis on the almost fantastical quality to the fighting. So his reach is far, even on directors who have very different kind of thematic tastes than him.
Yeah, and of course we should talk again about like his influences, because he is basically like a Hong Kong film brat, which makes sense. I like to call him a film brat just because like it makes sense in terms of like the transition around the globe of,
and we
like,
see that a lot. Like Kurosawa was a film brat.
Yeah. Those are almost always some of the best like directors are people who grew up with the movies and kind of like have like this personal connection to movies and They have their list of favorite movies and favorite creators that they inspire them.
Not just watching them though, but just like breaking them apart, like picking them to pieces to learn how each piece works. I mean, from generations like Kurosawa, they're doing that themselves. They're not going to film school, which is what we actually think of with the film brats. But like Kurosawa would just take a John Ford film and like literally break up the film and look at it.
Nerd, man. What kind of nerds like break down movies that intensely?
Mostly the Russians. The Russians started that, I think.
Could you imagine
Soviets
a pair of dudes so nerdy that they would like analyze movies on like a weekly or maybe even monthly basis?
That's pretty extreme dedication. That's a little too much for
me.
Who
would do that? Man, once a month. Who wants to set aside a whole day once a month to talk about movies? Weirdos. Anyway, so I can't remember the exact list. Now I want to look it up. I have it actually on one of the old documents, but there is like that list that was in like John Woo's Wikipedia article of his 3 favorite movies of all time, which
I've got it.
Seven Samurai, Lawrence of Arabia, and Les Samurai.
Yep, there it is.
After reading that, I was just like, oh, that makes so much more sense now.
Yeah.
Seven Samurai, you have a lot of the action and the blood and kind of like that whole sense of honor.
And the epic scale, which comes into Red Cliff.
Epic scale, Les Samurai, birds, and like that kind of slightly offbeat French New Wave style.
Yeah, the really quiet moments. And then Lawrence of Arabia, which is the inner turmoil of, losing your identity in what it is that you have committed yourself to.
Yeah. It's a very, very interesting, like consistent angle to examine worldview through that John Woo keeps taking to the characters and scripts that he works on, which I quite enjoy. Yeah. So I'm very excited to see what his new project Silent Night is going to be like.
I'm also interested in his other recent epic that was The Crossing.
The Crossing?
It's like a Chinese version of the Titanic.
Yeah. I don't know too much about it. I almost watched it, but I figured watching both versions of Red Cliff counted for enough epics in 1 month. Yeah. And I will at some point in my life, assuming I don't die horribly in a plane crash, I will watch The Crossing.
Or a boat sinking.
That would be horribly ironic. Alex, the boat's going down. What should we do? Quick, get my DVD of The Crossing.
I'm not finished with The Crossing yet. I'm not leaving.
I will will this boat to stay afloat.
All right, I think we have wooed ourselves out. So,
man, oh, have we? So what are we talking about next time on the podcast, Jonathan?
Yeah, next time we are talking about an actor, a great classic towering figure of British acting, Laurence Olivier. And we're talking about some of his great hits. And man, he has filled some big literary shoes and done it in a big way. So we are talking about his performance in Wuthering Heights from 1939, directed by William Wyler, who we just covered, so that'll be a good follow-up. Rebecca from 1940, directed, first of all, the first 3 of these are all classic literature. Actually, all of these are just like great based on great literature. So we got Wuthering Heights, Bronte, Emily Bronte, one of the Brontes, 1939, which I haven't read since high school, so I don't remember anything about it.
Oh, man.
We got
Rebecca.
Read
that for Mrs. Walsh's class?
I think it was, yeah. So I didn't get anything out of that.
What a pain. Anyway.
We've got Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, who is a classic. This is a classic story in its own right, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, one of the few Hitchcock films we have not covered, so this will be perfect. Also really dark. Richard III, one of Shakespeare's darkest stories from 1955. Shakespeare's story is now from 1955. The film version is from 1955.
Shakespeare wrote it in 1955.
And then we have finally, Marathon Man from 1976, which was written by William Goldman of Princess Bride fame. He wrote the novel and wrote the screenplay, and William Goldman is just such a good stinking writer. We'll have to do Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid someday. But yeah, so these are some towering films, stories, and a towering performance by Laurence Olivier that will be much fun to talk about.
Two tortured lovers and two very, very, very evil people.
Yeah.
That he's playing. And of course, he had one of the most prolific stage and screen careers of all time. And he's one of the people that most people who kind of like cover the 20th century think of when they think of actor. So yeah, that should be a very interesting deep dive. And he's even got a biography out there by Daniel Spotto. So I'm excited to do a deep dive into his career and times. But join us next time on the podcast for that. Anyway, Jonathan, what's going on over on the Patreon?
Yeah, if you'd like to support us, you can find us on Patreon and join our digital community. Everyone can join us on Discord. If you subscribe on Patreon, though, you can listen to us record the podcast live. And also you get the bonus podcast, which our most recent episode was Dr. Mabuse the Gambler from 1922, 100 years ago. Also just a classic Fritz Lang film and a really, really bad, like arch nemesis, super criminal character.
Kind of a supervillain.
It was great.
Kind
it was
of
a super
Marvel
villain.
before Marvel.
Basically, from the 20s. So you can listen to us talk about that back there. We're going to talk about some Buster Keaton. We've got lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff happened in 1922. Lots of stuff on the bonus podcast.
They were doing so much stuff in 1922. Let me tell you.
We are in the roaring 20s.
Roaring 20s. And now we're in the boring 20s. Except they're not boring, and I wish they would get back to being boring. That would be great. But no, stuff has to keep happening. Anyway, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
To find links to things that we talked about today, as well as a complete list of past episodes and all 418 films we've covered so far, visit thefilmlings.com.
You can join us for ongoing film discussions on our Discord server.
And to stay posted about upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at thefilmlings.
Summaries for each of the films this episode were recorded by me, Jason Harden. Find me on Twitter at TheBlueJay1994.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya.
Pew, pew, pew.
That should just be the explanation of all these movies. Pew, pew, pew.
Pew, 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 pew.
I actually saw a license plate recently that was literally PEWX3.
Oh, pew, pew, pew. That's actually pretty clever.
I know, I thought so too, but I was like, all right.